Spain is an example where they were able to completely reconquer their, not just their sacred space, but the entire geography, entire demography. They managed to make it completely Christian. And in that, of course, there were a lot of brutalities also. They also converted Jews and gave them an option to stay here or go over to another kingdom. So a lot of Jews in that time, they went over to Morocco along with the Muslims. So those Jews who stayed in Spain, they also had to reconvert to Christianity. So they did a thorough conquest. The non-Muslim countries are developing Muslim minorities. None of the Muslim countries are developing non-Muslim minorities. So in that case, this civilization was just waiting across the border, looking at you to blink for 500 years. And as soon as you did, they once again started entering your country. One of the greatest unfinished political agendas of Islam is Spain. They say that there are only two places in which Islam has lost. One is India, where they failed to conquer it completely, but that project, as they think, is undergoing. And the other place where they lost or their gains were completely reversed was Spain. Spain and Portugal, but Portugal mostly because it is with Spain. So it was the reconquest of Spain by Christianity, by Christian forces, Spanish but Christian forces, which is the only reversal, absolute and complete reversal of Islam that we have an example of. Spain became Islamic or ruled by Islam quite early in history, when the armies of Islam in 8th century itself, early 8th century, they came and they conquered Visigothic Spain. Again, there are many socio-political reasons at that time why it was a weak empire and lots of other reasons. But the fact stands that they crossed the Strait of Gibraltar and they landed in Spain and conquered Spain. So one very important part of Europe, West, as we know, the Iberian Peninsula, comprising of Spain and Portugal, it was converted very early, converted or ruled, not completely converted, but ruled by Islam very early on. And of course, they had destroyed the churches there, created and built a lot of new mosques, and converted a lot of locals. Also, a lot of Muslims from Africa and other parts, even Arabia, they also settled. So it was, for a large part, ruled by Islam very prominently and very aggressively. It was the Umayyad Caliphate under which Islamic armies conquered Spain. This happened around 711 CE, and it is heartening to know that the reconquest of Spain, in a way, started within 7 years, because some parts in northern Spain, they started reconquering and freeing parts of Spain in 718. But in large parts, for 5 centuries, it was quite conclusively ruled by Islamic armies and Islamic empires. In around 1248 CE, the real reconquest of Spain starts when Cordoba and Sevilla, they fall to the Christian armies and they once again revert back to Christendom. Now, Cordoba and Sevilla, they are great. Cordoba, that province, is a great and very important part of Spain, very culturally very important part of Spain. And when it reverts back to Spain and Christian Spain, that was a great boost. And after that, 200 years it took them, 200 more years it took them to completely make a reconquest of the Iberian Peninsula, when the last Muslim kingdom of Granada, it falls in at the when the 15th century is almost ending, and that is when the reconquest of Spain is quite complete under Ferdinand and Isabella, and that is why their legend is quite strong, not just in Spain, not just in the Western Europe, but in entire Christendom, that they managed to reclaim so completely their country and a very important part of Christendom from Islam. Now, what was their way? Spaniards were famous as extremely brutal, especially in New World and wherever they went. They were very cruel, very brutal. They were famous for Inquisition. Inquisition was everywhere in Europe, but Spanish Inquisition was especially famous for its brutality. And some say, and it is also true, that that brutality was also was ingrained in them because of their experience of fighting and completely uh, throwing Islamic armies on Islamic culture and religion and civilization from the Iberian Peninsula. And it is true to a certain extent. But if you compare them and what they did to what Islamic armies did, you will find that their way was much more culturally, civilizationally constructive. For example, they didn't just destroy the mosques that were created, they very creatively molded them into churches. They removed them and put some icons there of Jesus and all the associated Christian angels. And they did a complete makeover of all the great mosques in Cordoba and Granada. So that was how they removed the minares, reconstructed them in towers, and uh, made it a part of Christendom. So it was a much more constructive way, in the sense that the buildings stayed, their history stayed, but it was reclaimed as as a part of Christendom. So the sacred space of Spain was reclaimed for Christianity. It's a different thing that Christianity did the same to pagan sites, but while we are uh, discussing this case in of Ferdinand and Isabella and how the reconquest of Spain goes, they were very efficient at it. There are various things which strike out as how they did it. They were very particular. They gave the Muslims living in Spain the option of either converting to Christianity or leave and go to Morocco. So a lot of Muslims did choose that option and they went to Morocco. Those who stayed, they converted to make sure that they weren't practicing their old religion or Islam in secret. They would appoint godfathers and god parents so that they could oversee that the newly born aren't being bred or culturally bred in Islam, and to make sure that the Christianity is actually seeping into them. These are the tricks which they invented while converting pagans to Christianity, but they used it very effectively when they made a reconquest of Spain. So that and a lot of other factors stand out that they were very particular and in a way not individually violent in the sense and constructive in some ways that how to reclaim your sacred space. So Spain is an example where they were able to completely reconquer their not just their sacred space but the entire geography, entire demography. They managed to make it completely Christian. And in that, of course, there were a lot of brutalities also. They also converted Jews and gave them an option to stay here or go over to another kingdom. So a lot of Jews in that time, they went over to Morocco along with the Muslims. So those Jews who stayed in Spain, they also had to reconvert to Christianity. So they did a thorough conquest because they wouldn't tolerate any religious minorities. That's also the character of Christianity here. But they did this. They made a complete conquest of Spain. Now, what happens? This happens at the end of 15th century, around 1492, when Granada falls. The Muslim kingdom of Granada falls. Now, flash forward to 21st century. If we talk about today, there are once again 4% Muslims in Spain. For a long time, it was a very conservative kingdom. It was also criticized for that. General Franco, the regime was told to be brutal, although honestly speaking, he just let the status quo be. And he didn't change much in his society. There was a lot of poverty and a lot of problems, societal problems, like in every other country. But he didn't disturb, or he wasn't a dictator as he touted to be. But after the fall of that regime, once again, the minorities started settling, minorities in the sense Muslims from Africa and also other countries started settling in Spain. If you see this geography, the map of Spain, it's just a stone throws away from Africa and one of the greatest Islamic kingdoms of Maghreb, like Morocco. And a lot of people is still in Morocco. They habitually go to their first point of contact with Europe is Spain. That is what they see even while they are in Morocco. They see across the state, and they see Spain. So once again, there are 4% Muslims. It is right now, one of the weakest states in Europe. It is at the point of breaking into several states. There is no central national unity. And in 2004, Al Qaeda had a terrorist attack in Madrid, and they killed around 200 people or so. Or it was a brutal attack, train attack, in which a lot of bombs exploded in their metro and trains. And it was because a conservative the elections were going to happen 2 3 days later, and it was predicted that the conservative government was coming back in power. So they uh, made this attack, and after that, that government fell, and a liberal government came, which withdrew its army from the coalition, the Western coalition, which was fighting in Iraq and Afghanistan. So they threatened such a strong country with such a strong history with just one train attack, and they threatened it into submission. So the story to learn here is that they made a complete conquest of their country. They reclaimed completely their sacred space, geography, and architecture. But even after that, because your rulers in a particular country, your regimes will blink sooner or later. Yes, there are strong regimes right now in some country, but it will blink. That regime will fall because it's the nature of regimes to fall. It's the nature of leaders to disappear sooner or later. When a dictator is ruling, he thinks that as if his rule will never go away, and he behaves as if this all this splendor will never go away. But that doesn't happen. People fall, civilizations fall, regimes fall, and so that strong strain of Spanish rulers' kingdoms, that also went away, and modern democracy and weak liberal anarchic philosophy started reigning in Spain once again. And when that happened, and consider the fact that all this while Islamic kingdoms were waiting just across the border, just a stone throws away, and they were completely Islamic, 99.99% Islamic. They never let any minorities in. Now, this 4% minority in Spain, you would say that this is the era of globalization. People shift from here to there, and it's natural and it's true. But it would be okay had that been the case with Morocco also. If Morocco had been developing some Christian minorities, but which is not happening. It is still 100. They go from 99% to 99.99% to 100%. They never develop any minorities, non-Muslim minorities, but that's not happening. The other part of the bargain is not happening if this is just cultural mixing. The non-Muslim countries are developing Muslim minorities. None of the Muslim countries are developing non-Muslim minorities. So in that case, this civilization was just waiting across the border, looking at you to blink for 500 years, and as soon as you did, they once again started entering your country. This shows us that there is no local solution to a problem, like I earlier also said, to a problem which is civilizational, and we have to think globally. Just like they think globally, we have to think globally in order to tackle this problem. So that is the message which the reconquest of Spain, and now the reconquest which is happening, because it's an unfinished agenda of political Islam, because it was reversed, they want to gain it back. And so in that case, it is reconquista of Spain which is happening right now. And that is why we should always have a global and a very long term policy towards a civilizational force like this. Thank you.